All right, folks, so let's go ahead and begin. Again, for those of you that just joined the call, my name is Kevin Yamashita, and I'm going to be your host for the next 45 minutes or so as we discuss Microsoft Dynamics 365 Field Service. A quick introduction about me. I'm a sales engineer with Sonoma Partners, so I work with the sales team to talk to prospects about the Dynamics platform and help them understand the power of it and envision what it can do for them in their organizations and their businesses. Before this, I worked on the delivery side of the house here at Sonoma, so I'm happy to bring some of that real-world expertise and knowledge about how we actually implement these systems to this conversation today as well. Sonoma Partners, for those of you who are not familiar with the organization, is a CRM consulting firm based out of Chicago. And CRM is really the only thing we do here. So we're one of the largest CRM-only consulting firms in the country. But that being said, you came here today to hear a little bit about field service for Dynamics 365. So let's go ahead and start that conversation. So before we dive into the specific features of the module and the demonstration, I thought it would be useful to take a step back and talk about general trends we're seeing from a consulting perspective in the service or in the support industry. And there's a couple main things that I'd like to call out to get us all on the same page. One of the first things that we're noticing is that firms are really starting to figure out, how do we make money on service, right? How do we turn service not into a revenue generator and not have it be just a cost center? And that means that firms are starting to think about things like upsell and cross-sell opportunities in the context of support interactions. It means that firms are starting to think about service plans and warranties and how we get folks to find value in them so they continue to buy into them and upgrade those plans. And it also means that we have to have some line of communication between the service department and the sales department for when we do suss out a lead during a service interaction so that the correct account executives or the correct salespeople can circle back around and close that deal and win that business. In addition, what we're seeing is that customers expect more individualized support. Now, what does this mean? Right? The way to think about this is if I'm a customer that's purchasing some type of product from an organization and I have an issue, I expect that organization to know what product I've purchased. Right? So organizations are starting to track assets at the customer level and using workflow automation to help them do that. In addition, individual customers are expecting omni-channel support, right? I want to be able to communicate with an organization on whatever modality I'm most comfortable with, be it chat, email, social, and firms are needing to adapt to this ecosystem. And then lastly, the process for support and service needs to be transparent and efficient. And ultimately, what this means for organizations that are providing these services is that they need to keep their promises. That's respecting scheduling windows. That's fixing things the first time we're on site. It means clear pricing in advance of a service call being made. It's being transparent about when we think someone's actually going to get there. All right? So you see the trend here is that as these expectations go higher and higher for the consumers and the customers, firms are forced to find tools to help them solve these different issues. And what I really like to close with here is that B2C organizations, business-to-consumer firms, are starting to get this, and that's forcing the hand of B2B organizations. Those expectations are higher now because we as individual consumers know what we expect from the Ubers and the Apples and the Microsofts of the world. All right. So like I said, really the idea here is, how do we find a tool to help us provide superlative support to our customers? Right? How do we find a tool to help us do the right thing, to find unused service opportunities so that we're helping customers take advantage of the plans that they bought into? How can we provide recurring maintenance to make sure that all of our products work just like they're supposed to? And can we be proactive about that by taking advantage of things like the Internet of Things and device connectivity? All of that is what I want you to be thinking about as we start to really dive into field service. Now, the first thing you're going to be asking yourself is what is field service? What is this module for Dynamics 365? And I want you to think about it like this. At its core, the field service module facilitates scheduling and dispatching. All right? So the idea is that this is a tool that is going to help us schedule different types of work that have to be performed, given objectives to optimize that scheduling, and given constraints like skills, territory, distance that the service technician has to travel. That's kind of the tier 1 level of functionality. And then as organizations get a little bit more mature and a little bit more robust, field service starts to offer features like inventory and billing management. So we can track the inventory that we have on each truck. We can understand what service jobs a truck is going to be doing, and we can make sure that we have the right inventory on that truck. So now we can start to make sure that we're going to be prepared when we get on site for the first time. We can start to track burn rates of inventory. And when you get a little bit more fancy, you can start to think about things like invoicing of the materials that you used, purchase order workflows, return authorization workflows. And then, of course, baked into the product is mobile functionality, a mobile application that the service technicians can take with them while they're on the go so they can access all that great wealth of data accessible in the Dynamics ecosystem. And then finally, there's a customer-facing portal. We talked about omni-channel a little bit before, right? So if a customer wants to place a service request, for example, this gives us a website that they can log in to do that. And then they can track the status of that service request as it proceeds through the workflow. Now, I suspect that a good portion of the folks on the webinar right now are familiar with Dynamics 365, formerly known as Dynamics CRM, as a platform. But for those of you that aren't, I want to take a moment to really talk about what that is and why that's important. All right? So why Dynamics 365? Well, the beauty of Dynamics 365 is it's a CRM, or what we like to call an XRM platform. Right? That means it is highly scalable and highly customizable. So when we talk about field service, this is not just a module that is pigeonholed into the service industry. Really, it's scalable and flexible in a lot of different ways. And I want you to think about field service as a logistics platform. If I have something I want to schedule, if I have some work that needs to get assigned to the right resource to perform, field service is a tool that can facilitate that. And the beauty is that it doesn't have to be just work orders. Maybe there's a workflow on the sales side of the house where we're scheduling demonstrations on site, for example, and we want to be able to schedule those demos to the right representatives with the skills to deliver those demonstrations. Field service is just as capable as doing that as core field service workflows like you might see with home security installations or HVAC repair. The other benefit of Dynamics 365 is that field service is just one part of the greater ecosystem, right? So in addition to a field service module, we also have a sales module, a service module for call centers, a project service module for estimating and executing time-based projects. And what we can do is we can tie this all into the same system and into the same database. So we reduce the need for integrations. We improve the quality of our data because there's less duplication, and that improves our reporting, and that makes us more agile. And then, of course, there's all the modern capabilities that we expect with an XRM system: scalable architecture, workflow automation, rich integration with O365, and now machine learning. We're starting to see different types of machine learning get embedded into these systems. So not only can we execute as efficiently as possible, but we can try to be proactive by looking at our past data to predict the future. And that's really the power of the Dynamics 365 platform. But I suspect that most of you came here today because you wanted to see a demonstration of field service. So let's go ahead and dive into the system so you can see how it actually works. So what we're looking at right now is Dynamics 365, formerly known as Dynamics CRM. And before we dive into the field service functionality, I want to take just a brief moment to talk through the navigation, because I think that's really helpful to help you understand where we are in the system and what we're doing. So what you can see at the top of the screen is what we call the navigation bar. And as I open the navigation bar, you can see all the different modules in the system that I alluded to earlier. Our sales module, our service module, marketing, field service, project service. And then as I click into these individual modules, I start to see the different entities or objects that we can interact with. So on the service side of the house, cases and accounts. On the field service side of the house, work orders, the schedule board, customer assets. So you can pay attention to that as we step through the demonstration to really help you have a sense of where you are and what you're doing in the system. Now, when we talk about field service inside of Dynamics 365, the main object or the main entity that we're going to be interacting with is one called the work order. The work order represents the what we're going to do, who we're going to do it with, why we're going to do it, how we're going to do it. It all starts with the work order. So the first thing we need to do in the system is generate a work order. And there's a couple different ways we can do that. In this particular scenario that we're going to walk through, I want you to imagine that we're an organization that does basement sealants and basement repairs. So installation of sump pumps, sealant of basements to prevent flooding, those types of things. And in this particular case, I'm working in our call center, and I have this case. We have a customer that just called in complaining that the battery backup alarm for their sump pump keeps going off. It sounds like we did the installation a couple weeks ago, and the client kind of wants to know what's going on. So as we look at this case record, we can see a couple different things. Of course, we have this information from the actual call when they called in, and you can see that it starts to get translated into discrete fields in the system. So we can see the customer in question. We can see the contact. We immediately see that they are on the gold service plan, and we can even see the actual product or the asset that we installed for them. Over here on the right, we can even see details about when we actually did that installation. So in this particular workflow, if we talk to the customer on the phone and realize that we have to get a technician out to help them with this, it's as simple as going to the toolbar at the top of the screen and clicking Convert to Work Order. And just like that, a work order record is going to get created behind the scenes. Now, of course, conversion from a case is not the only way that you can create work orders in the system. For those of you familiar with Dynamics 365 already as a platform, a work order is just another entity. So that means that we can convert an opportunity into a work order. Maybe when an opportunity closes, the first thing that we do once we've won that business is get on site with the customer. That's a perfectly valid workflow. Perhaps we have a service agreement in place where we're going to do preventative maintenance once every month. There is a service agreement entity in the field service module, and we can use that to automatically generate work orders. In addition, we can create work orders outright just as new records, or we could integrate them in from an ancillary system. And of course, like I alluded to before, if we wanted to have a customer-facing portal where customers could log in and create their own work orders, that is a perfectly valid use case as well. So you can see that there's a lot of different ways to get a work order in the system. That being said, let's take a look at what a work order actually is. I'm going to go ahead and open up a work order record. And for those of you paying attention at the top of the screen, you can see that the navigation bar has changed to reflect where I am. I am now in the field service module. I have opened the work order entity, and now I'm looking at work order 82. Excellent. And again, you're going to see that at its core, the work order record looks very similar to the case record because, again, we're seeing this in the context of the XRM platform. We have our business process flow across the top of the screen, which helps us get guided to a successful outcome. We see the fields on the left-hand side of the screen, and we see some subgrids on the right. Now, like I said earlier, the work order really explains what we're doing. It answers all of those important questions about this service job. The first thing it answers is the who. Who are we performing this service for? Now, what you can see is that the system automatically filled in the service account from the case, and it automatically filled in the billing account from the case. So we're taking the information we already know and pre-populating it to prevent fat finger mistakes and to ensure cleanliness of our data. In addition, we can see the primary contact that got pulled in from that original case. If I scroll down a little bit further, you can see that the system is smart. Based on that actual account, it knows we're in the Illinois service territory, and it can even pre-populate the address of where this account is located, complete with geocoding. The next question that the work order is going to answer for us is the what and the how. We can see from the case that we pulled in that asset automatically as well. And you can see that we have a priority defaulted. How did the system know what that priority is? Well, we have this idea here called incident type, right? The incident type represents exactly the how. It's the what are we going to do? And this is something that we had defined on the case, so it was able to become pre-populated on the work order. And you can see that we have all sorts of different incident types built out in our demo system. In this case, it's a sump pump failure. We also have waterproofing, basement windows, crawl space assessment. And what we're able to do based on this incident type is continue to pre-populate information onto the work order. Based on this incident type, we know that generally a sump pump failure is going to take about 2 3/4 hours to complete. And we know that that's generally a pretty urgent thing. So we're able to start to, again, pre-populate some of those elements on the work order. But there's even more than that. Based on that incident type, we can go a step farther and say, okay, what are the actual steps that I need to perform for this given procedure, right? And based on that incident type, I can populate some of the service tasks that my technician is going to need to perform, the estimated duration of those tasks, and I can even track those towards completion while they're on site. Similarly, I can look at my incident type and find the different products that are going to be necessary for me to complete the job, like we talked about earlier during the slides. And I can figure out what are the services we're going to provide and how much are we going to bill for those services. Now, of course, this is all configurable on the work order because no two work orders are necessarily the same, but it's a great jumping off point to maintain consistency of processes. The other thing that's nice here too is this gives the field technician and the dispatcher a sense of what is this going to cost and how long is this going to take. So we can tell the customer what we expect right away so their expectations can be set, and if there's a difference in expectations, we can address that earlier before somebody actually gets on site. The next thing that the work order is going to address is the when. So I want to draw your attention to the preferences section right here. So for anyone that's had to deal with any type of dispatch, you know how frustrating it can be to get a 6-hour window when you have to be at home and not really knowing when that service technician is going to arrive. So there's tools on the work order to help make sure that we are setting those expectations appropriately and that we're following through with our commitments. We can define the date window when we want the service technician to be out there. Maybe in our case, we can say that we want them to be there here between the 15th and the 17th. If I wanted, I could get even more granular with a time window. And if I wanted to take a step further and say, I actually promised within this window, you can set that as well. And we're going to see in a little bit how the system is able to use those values. Then the last thing that's answered on the work order is the why. Why are we coming out to do this? And what you can see over here on the right is that we link back to that originating record, in this case, the sump pump weak battery case. So by providing that connectivity throughout the process, stepping from case to work order, but being able to point back the other direction, you never lose sense of how you got where you are, and you always have a sense of who were the people that my customers talked to before this. You never have that issue where you call on someone and you don't know they have a conversation with one of your peers just an hour ago. All right. So that's just a brief step through some of the key features of the work order record. But you know what? Let's go ahead and see if we can get a technician scheduled to go out on site and fix this. Since we just did this installation a couple weeks ago, since these guys are on the gold plan, you know, I'd really like to get this taken care of today. So let's see what we can do. So there's a couple different ways that you can do scheduling of work orders in the system, but what we're going to look at first is a tool called the Scheduling Assistant. And I access this by just clicking the Schedule Assistant on the toolbar from the work order record. So there's a couple different things I want you to pay attention to when I open the Scheduling Assistant. First, I want to draw your attention to the left-hand side of the screen. This is going to be where I can define my search criteria. So you're going to see a couple different things. First, you can see that the available duration got pulled in from my work order. Since I estimated the work order would take 2 hours and 45 minutes, that's the amount of time that I'm going to be searching for availability with. The next thing is the radius. This is going to say, how far do I want my technicians to travel to get to this job? Below that, we have the start and end date. And you'll see that these values actually got pulled in from the system, from the work order, based on that date range that I set. You can see that immediately there's a resource selected. for those of you that were paying attention, as I split back over to the work order, notice that my preferred resource, Jorge, got pulled in from the account record. The system is smart and automatically pulls Jorge then in as my preferred resource. In addition, since this is a sump pump repair incident type, the system is going to list sump pumps as a characteristic or as a skill that any technician needs to have if they want to be eligible for this job. So again, you can see that all the information that we've entered in the system thus far is continued to be leveraged so that we can try to be as efficient as possible to find the right resource for the job. So let's go ahead and search for resources and see who's available to help us out. Excellent. So if you pull your attention to the center of the screen now, you can see the results. Now we want to get this taken care of today, so I'm going to look at this slot on 12/15, which is today. And it looks like, you know what, Jorge does have some availability. It looks like he would only have to travel about 14 miles, and he could start heading over there about 2 o'clock this afternoon. That's a decent amount of availability. So maybe Jorge is the right guy for this. But you know what? Just to make sure that all of my bases are covered, I'm going to go ahead and uncheck Jorge from my search parameters and see if we have any other technicians that are also available. We'll go ahead and search one more time. And now you see that we have a handful more of hits that have come back. You see that Chris, Efren, Van were all available to help with this job. Now, in situations like this, when we have multiple resources, it can be a little bit difficult to figure out who that best fit resource is. One tool that can help you with this is by looking at what we call the map view. So I'm going to change over to the map view tab right now. So what you can see on the map view is that I have a list of all of the resources that might be able to help me with this job. And as I click those different resources, some pins drop on the screen. What this is going to tell me is where my resource starts, indicated by the little house icon, and then what work orders this resource is scheduled for based on the numbered pins. And then the pin with a star that you see in the west loop right over here is the work order that we're trying to schedule. So in this particular case, we know that Jorge is the preferred resource. It looks like he has one job on the south side of the city. It's a bit of a jog to get him back up to the loop to get this job done, but it's not horrible. He could do it. Let's take a look at some of our other resources to see what's going on with them. Maybe we can look at Van, for example. Now that's interesting. Van has one work order and he is right in the loop, so maybe he's a better fit. And we can keep going down the list, taking a look at some of the different resources that we have and taking a look at exactly where they're scheduled to go. Efren, for example, has a job out in Wheaton. Maybe he's not the best fit, right? Now, in any case, because we know that Jorge is the preferred resource, I'm going to go ahead and say, even though he has to go ahead and drive a little bit further, I want to schedule him because I want to make sure our customer is as happy as possible. So to do that, all I have to do is select the row for Jorge. The schedule assistant is going to calculate when Jorge is available to start that job. It's going to estimate the travel time based on the distance he has to travel between the different job sites. That will calculate his arrival time and his estimated end time. Looks like he's going to finish up right at 5 o'clock. So I think even though this is a little bit of travel for him, that's perfect. We still get him out before 6 o'clock, which is when we usually let our folks go. So I'm going to go ahead and hit schedule and close to get that scheduled. All right. So now that we have the scheduling of this work order taken care of, let's go ahead and change gears a little bit and put on our dispatcher hat to understand what the interface looks like to interact with the schedule in mass. All right. So the screen we're looking at now is what we call the schedule board. And this is really the home base for any type of dispatcher that's working in the system. And before we start diving into some of the workflows, there's a couple key elements of the interface that I want to call out. The first and most obvious thing is you see that in the center of the screen, there are rows for each of the different resources. You can see some of the guys we talked about before: Jorge, Van, Efren. And you can see that the different blocks or rectangles on the grid represent the different work orders that are scheduled to them. So in this particular case, you can see that work order 82 that we just scheduled for Jorge. You'll note that there are different colors for the work order boxes, and those represent the different statuses of the work orders. So as a dispatcher, it's really easy for me to understand what might be completed, which we see in green, what might be in progress, which we see in dark blue, what is still scheduled in light blue, and then where somebody might be on break or where somebody might be in travel lane, which is orange and purple respectively, right? And all of this can get updated in real time as our field staff are on the go because they have a mobile application with them that can phone back home. And this helps us adjust the schedule during the day. If somebody gets done early, if somebody is running late, if we have an urgent work order that comes in at the last minute, we have real-time information about where folks are, how the work orders are progressing, and what's next so that we can understand exactly how we can be as efficient as possible. Down at the bottom of the screen, you see the unscheduled work order view, right? And this is going to show you all the work orders in the system that are currently unscheduled. On the left-hand side of the screen, we have a different version of a map view. And this is a little bit interesting. What you'll notice is we have a bunch of pins of different colors. And all of these different pins represent work orders that are scheduled. If a pin has a color to it, it means it's assigned to a technician. If a pin has a gray color to it, it means it's unassigned. So for example, if we zoom in a little bit and take a look at the Rockford area, I know that this is Victor Tim's territory. And you can see that all the pins are in type that greenish blue color to represent that Victor is taking care of them today. There is, however, this one gray pin right here that isn't scheduled yet. I can go ahead and click that pin, and you'll notice that that work order gets selected for me at the bottom of the screen. And you know what? This is an emergency work order for some yard flooding. This seemed kind of high priority to me. So let's see if there's some way that we can get this scheduled today so that this customer is happy and this is taken care of. Well, we already saw the ability to use the scheduling assistant to schedule things on the schedule board. But in a situation like this, when I look at Victor's grid, at his row, it doesn't really look like he has a huge block of time for an 165-minute job. But I want to get this scheduled, so what can I do? Well, you actually have drag and drop capabilities on this interface. So I can go ahead and take this work order and drag it up to the schedule board. And we can say, you know what, this is a high priority work order, so I want to make sure this is the next thing he goes to after job 66. And I know that he's in progress with the job right now because it's in dark blue. So we have this issue that job 45 needs to get rescheduled then. So I'm going to go ahead and click that job. On the right-hand side of the screen, the details pane opens. So this is going to give me a little bit more information about what this work order or what this job is. I can see that it is a basement assessment job for 120 minutes. And as a dispatcher, I know, you know what, we hold 120 minutes for our basement assessments, but usually they're not that long. So I actually think that we can squeeze this job in today without too many issues. So what I can do is go ahead and take that job and just drag it on the schedule board. And maybe we can say it's going to start at 4 o'clock. And you know what, since I know it's probably not going to take 2 hours, I can even adjust the time just like this. And let's say an hour and a half. That seems more realistic to me. And you can see just like that, we're able to get all of the Rockford jobs scheduled and do a little bit of massaging of the schedule to fit everything in. Wonderful. Looking back at the map view, I can continue to do some additional scheduling to try to get as much scheduled today as possible, seeing that I do have some folks that are not completely utilized and not completely booked up, based on both the grid and also looking at some of these utilization percentages on the left-hand side. So maybe what I want to do is take a look at this unscheduled work order right here, number 47. So we saw that we were able to open the schedule assistant from the context of a work order record. Well, I can open the schedule assistant from the context of the schedule board and the map view as well. So I can click that button just like that. You can see that this is a yard drainage work order, so we had that skill that got populated in automatically. I can go ahead and search for resources. We can see who's available. Looks like Chris has some time. And just like before, it's just that simple to find a resource with the right skills and get that scheduled. And then you'll notice over here on the schedule board, as I refresh it, oh, there goes, it appears. There's that work order, just like that. Wonderful. So you see we have a handful of different ways to get work orders scheduled. Now, this is great if you have a workflow where you want to find jobs that are best fit with resources, but maybe that's not your workflow. Maybe you like to hold large blocks of time because you're only doing 1 or 2 jobs a day. Well, that's absolutely fine. A third way we can actually schedule jobs on the schedule board is by actually just dragging and dropping. So instead of dragging from the case depot, maybe I want to schedule a 2-hour job at the end of the day for Efren. I can drag my 2-hour job just like that, and then go the other direction and select the work order that's eligible, or the work order that I want him to be performing the service on. So you see we have a handful of different options from a scheduling perspective for the dispatcher. Finally, there is one more way to schedule, because if you're thinking about this, we have all of our resources in the system. We know all of their skills. We know where they start. We know all the work orders. We know the requirements for those work orders. We know those locations. If only there was some way that the system could automatically schedule our work orders and all of our jobs to be as efficient as possible. And there absolutely is that functionality. So there's another feature called the automated scheduling engine, or the automated routing engine. And what this will actually do is it will consider different objectives, be it utilization, minimizing drive time, and different constraints, such as respecting an 8-hour day, or maybe making sure that we are only staffing skilled resources for these jobs, and it can automatically schedule unscheduled work orders on the schedule board for the upcoming days. To take that a step further, it's also capable of rescheduling already scheduled jobs. So maybe 2 days out you have some things on the schedule board, but because of the order that things are scheduled, it's not as efficient. This automated engine can actually go in and reschedule all that to make sure that your schedule is as efficient as possible. So this is one of the reasons that I said that this is not just a field service tool, this is a logistics tool. And you start to see some of those reasons now. Something else that I'll call out as we're looking at the schedule board is right now we're looking at jobs that span several hours. Right? That's great if we're doing something that takes a couple hours on site. But what if I'm scheduling resources not for hours, but days and weeks and months? That's perfectly acceptable as well. If you take a look, I can change my resolution here, and maybe I can look at my day view or my week view. And obviously, in this particular case, I don't have a lot of appointments on the schedule, so it doesn't fill out. But the point is that if you're scheduling resources in mass for weeks or months, all of these things we talked about, the scheduling assistant, the drag and drop interface, those things still apply. And to take it a step further, if you're scheduling crews, you can actually group different resources together in a crew and automatically schedule all those resources by just assigning the work to one single crew. So you can see this is a highly, highly flexible tool. Now, I know there are some folks on the call today that also sat in our project service webinar yesterday. And for those folks on the phone, you might be thinking to yourself, well, this is interesting. Wasn't there a scheduling board we saw yesterday, and didn't we talk a little bit about resources and skills? And you're absolutely right. And this comes back to the power of Dynamics 365 as one integrated platform with one integrated database. When we talk about resources and skills inside of field service, those are those same entities, those same objects, those same records as you're going to be using in a project service capacity. So those two systems play nicely with one another. You get the economies of scale there, and what's great is you can even share resources between those systems. So if you have somebody that might be doing project-based work but also needs to go on site, you can still schedule those resources without worrying about being overbooked, which is really, really powerful. It's really, really useful. So that's a little bit about the scheduling board and some of the scheduling workflows. Let's change gears a little bit and pull up the mobile application now. So like I mentioned before, there is a robust mobile application that allows our technicians to access all of this field service-related data while they're on the go. Now, some of you might be thinking, now, this is interesting. I expected you to pull up the native Dynamics mobile application. And what you'll notice here is this is not the native Dynamics mobile application. This mobile app is actually built on a platform called Resco. And there's a little bit of backstory here. Field service is an application was originally built by an organization called Field One. And they actually built Field One on the Dynamics CRM platform because of its scalability, because it's an XRM platform. Microsoft went ahead and acquired Field One a number of years ago at this point and has been continuing to bake that product in to the Dynamics 365 system. So what's really great about this is field service is not necessarily a new product. It's actually very mature and very robust with a large install base. There are, however, some legacy things that continue to linger from those days, and this RESCO mobile application is one of them. On the roadmap for Microsoft is actually moving all this functionality into the native mobile application, but there is not parity at this point. So what I'm going to show you today is the RESCO application, but know that in the current 365 release and the subsequent releases, we're going to see more of this specialized field service functionality get moved into the native mobile application, which again is powerful because that means that we can take advantage of some of these field service pieces of functionality for our non-field service workflows eventually in that native mobile app. And that's pretty exciting. Anyway, let's go ahead and talk about this mobile application now and a little bit of what it can do. So when I'm a field technician on the go, I need to be able to see all this data. I need to be able to see it in different ways depending on what I'm doing. So the first thing you can see here is a map view. We have the ability to map all sorts of different things. Right now we're just looking at bookings in the system. And because I'm a system administrator, I can see all the bookings. But realistically, this would be filtered down to see the bookings for just one individual service rep. So maybe if I'm my guy out in Rockford, I only see these 3 pins. And this is how I know what I have scheduled for the day and where I have to go. I'm able to filter that, though. Maybe I don't want to look at just scheduled bookings. Maybe I want to look at all work orders, the unscheduled ones, too. Or maybe I want to see the location of all the accounts I own because I'm going to try to call them some of those accounts just to check in and say hello. You have that flexibility here. I obviously have access to my account list, and it's easy for me to jump in and make a call from my device or send an email just like that. I have access to a calendar view of all my bookings for the day. So if I don't want to look at the map view, but I want to look at more of an Outlook style planner, I can see exactly what I have scheduled and for how long it's scheduled. And all of this is highly customizable. So right now you're just seeing the name of the owner for these bookings, but you could pull in all the work order related data if you wanted to. The incident type, the primary contact, their phone number, the address. I can dive in and look at individual work orders. So I can look at the work order that we created earlier, work order 82, that sump pump failure. We can see that's already scheduled. And even though the format of the interface is a little bit different, you still see some of those common data points, right? My service account, my work order type, the customer asset I'm working with. Now, one of the important things I want to call out about customer asset is in this particular case, we went ahead and entered that in advance. But maybe that's not the case. Maybe we have serialized inventory in the field and we want to track all of the work orders that we perform, but we don't know that when we're on the phone with folks. Well, that's fine, because this mobile application also is barcode compatible. So if I have a barcode scanner, I can actually configure it to use that barcode scanner to automatically set the customer asset just by scanning that once I get on site. It's pretty cool, pretty slick. I can flip over and see some of my service tasks, all the different products that I said that I was going to use. And I can even jump in and indicate whether or not I used those products while I was on site, so we know whether or not I need to bill for those. I can look specifically at some of those customer assets. So in this case, let's go ahead and open up that asset record. And if this was more specialized, maybe I would have additional fields built out to give me more details about what model this is. If it's a customized asset, I could understand some of the configuration we did. I can look at all the incidents in the system where we did service on this asset. So in this case, we just have these sump pump failure work orders. But if I'm coming on site multiple times for preventive maintenance, or if this is something that continues to fail, I would have that history right there accessible to me. And then I can also look at some notes. I can see when the installation was performed. And if I want to take an advantage of the camera on my mobile device, I can even take a look at pictures that I might have taken of the room that this is in, some of the configuration, things like that. So that's just a quick whirlwind tour of the mobile application. But as you can see, very robust, highly customizable. There's a lot of power under the hood. For example, one of the things that I didn't mention is that this has the ability to phone locations home. So we've talked a lot about the ability to track where a work order is scheduled, where a resource is to find the optimal resource based on travel time. If I want to configure this, in addition to looking at start and end locations, I can actually track where a resource is en route based on this mobile application to give me that much more agility and understanding about where my resources are and help me be that much more efficient. Now, there's a lot of elements of the system that we're not going to get a chance to talk about today, but there's other features that are baked into the product that I think it's important that everyone understands exists. We talked a little bit earlier about agreements, preventative maintenance. So if I am in a medical imaging company, for example, I might have an MRI machine that's deployed in the field, and I want to make sure we're going out on site once a week to service that. I can actually create an agreement record that will automatically create those preventative service work orders for me. They just show up on the depot at a scheduled time, and the dispatcher knows to schedule them. On the flip side of things, if I'm working on the support side of the house and I have service level agreements that we've agreed upon, that I have to get a technician out in 2 hours or 6 hours or 24 hours, we have the ability to implement SLAs and to have those timers tick down. Inside of field service, based on the Dynamics platform, you can do things like billing approval workflows. And we already talked about inventory management, purchase orders, and return authorizations a little bit before. Now, as we close, I think the last thing I want to call out is, like I said, this is not a new product. This is actually a very robust module. And what's exciting about that is it means that as Microsoft continues to invest in the Dynamics platform, they're continuing to build out new, really exciting functionality inside the system. There's a couple new features that just came out in the Dynamics 365 release in November that I wanted to mention to everyone. The first is something called Connected Field Service. This is really the idea of the Internet of Things. So this is Microsoft's first attempt at using Azure as a layer to accept IoT feeds that can be piped directly into the Dynamics ecosystem. Essentially, you can create records in the system and then tie those back to actual devices deployed in the field and get feeds from those devices. So if you're getting telemetry from the field, if something sends an error message or a warning message, you're able to take advantage of Connected Field Service to have that information flow into Dynamics, and then maybe based on some of the workflow automation, you can automatically create a work order or send an email or flag the correct person. Another brand new feature that's really exciting is the idea of multi-entity scheduling. So on the schedule board right now, you see that all of the elements that I have scheduled are just work orders. In this latest release, we now have the ability to schedule not just work orders, but actually any entity in the system. So I could have a schedule board that had not just work orders on it, but also projects scheduled to it, and opportunities scheduled to it. That makes us so much more flexible, again, as a logistics platform and not just a field service tool. There's also additional integration with Outlook that we see in the latest release, so that as I schedule work orders to the schedule board, those resources can actually have those appointments show up on their Outlook calendars in exchange. And then we talked a little bit already about how we're seeing the mobile functionality start to move from Resco to the native mobile application. Wonderful. So that being said, that's really all the content that I had that I wanted to cover today, really giving you guys an introduction to what field service is and helping you to understand a little bit about some of this functionality. Now, obviously, we only scratched the surface. There is just so much more you can do with this. So the go-do that I have for all of you on the line right now is if you are interested in this, if this piqued your interest, give us a shout here at Sonoma, and we'd be happy to sit down and talk to you a little bit more about how field service can meet your needs, and maybe talk about some custom demos specific for your use cases. If you already have an account executive that you're working with, that's the correct person to reach out to. If you don't have an account executive, feel free to contact us via our website, or you can email me directly. And my email address is in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen right now, kyamashita@sonomapartners.com. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and stop and then open things up to questions for the last 10 minutes. So if anyone has any questions based on what they saw, you can go ahead and enter those in the chat window right now, and we'll see if we can run through some of those things. All right, I've got one question, probably from someone that was on the webinar yesterday. Is this the same schedule board as PSA, as in project service? So the answer is yes. That's one of the cool things that we're seeing is as project service continues to get built out and as field service continues to get built out, we talked a little bit about how some of the entity relationships, the resources, the skills, the bookings are getting combined. We're also seeing some of the interfaces getting combined as well, and the schedule board is one of them. For those of you that might be a little bit curious why those interfaces look slightly different between today and yesterday, that's simply due to the fact that this is an older version of the schedule board, and what you saw yesterday is slightly newer. Like I said, the D365 release just came out, and this org hasn't been upgraded yet. So that's kind of where that difference comes from. Great question. Anything else anyone is thinking about today? All right. It doesn't look like it. So again, I want to thank everyone for their attention, and again, encourage you to reach out to us here at Sonoma if you have any more questions or any more interest about this. I'll stay on the line for about 5 more minutes in case anyone comes up with any last-minute questions. But otherwise, thank you so much for attending, and have a fantastic rest of your day.